Hello everybody, long time no see. In this video I'm going to be talking about 4 different things, and I basically have a lot to say, a lot to unpack. So let me just get started with the first topic, which is failure therapy. So a lot of this, I would say a lot of these topics now, I filter them through ChatGPT to kind of like get a boost on ideas and to get more information and examples for you guys, so I can share on here. And failure therapy is very interesting because I'm actually working through something right now, which is trying to get rid of my need or reduce my need for fame and fortune, right? And the way in which I'm working on this is, through various means. The incubation process is something that I'm constantly working on. If you don't know what that is, go check out my video on the incubation process. But you're basically being exposed to different sources of information, like videos, articles, talking to people, ChatGPT, Google, journaling, meditating, right? All these type of you're asking yourself one question, like for example, how can I reduce or how can I overcome anxiety? How can I reduce my need for fame and fortune constantly through these various methods, right? You type this in on YouTube, right? Okay, anyway, I talk about that in the incubation process. And I like to ask ChatGPT, after I initially ask ChatGPT like the question of how can I don't know, work on, how can I reduce my need for fame and fortune? The tips come up, like they come out like, gratitude, journaling, giving, philanthropy, being grateful, like all these things, right? And then after that, I like to ask ChatGPT, what are some like weird or rare or unorthodox or maybe even controversial methods or solutions or alternatives to this problem, to this question, right? And I like the things that ChatGPT tells me then, because they're not your typical common everyday thing that like anybody would say or Google would say, right? And in this case, this came up, which was failure therapy. I had never heard of this. So failure therapy basically consists of doing things that you know you will fail at. So you do things that you know you're not going to do well on purpose, just to kind of expose yourself to that like criticism, which I thought was, as in experimental terms, I think it's like kind of interesting, just to figure out like what would happen, what would be the outcome, how would you feel if you intentionally did things that you knew you were going to be bad at, right? So yeah, you try things you know you will fail at. For example, you can try doing, I mean, and they don't have to be big things. You can go from very, private things, like such as learning a language, to more public things, like talking about a topic that you know nothing about, right? So like, or making a joke that you know is not going to be good, is not going to make people laugh, but you do it on purpose. That's the difference, right? Yeah, so some examples here of failure therapy would be trying to learn a very complex language, right? So you know you're going to fail, you try to do it, and then, I guess you have to see how you feel, what you think about that, right? Cooking a complex recipe, that may involve like more things, because you actually have to go out and buy like the ingredients, spend money, spend time, more time, than like learning a hard language, more resources. But I think it would still be interesting, just like try to make a really hard, like what's the hardest dish to cook out there? What are the ingredients? You get that, try to do it, fail, see how you feel. Talking about something you know nothing about in front of friends, right? So let's say I know nothing about, I don't know, the human throat. So all of a sudden I start talking about the human throat, right? Like, oh yeah, the vocal cords, and the human throat is actually very flexible, and just people are gonna be looking at me like all weird, like what the hell are you even saying, right? Um, or talking to a stranger, right? This is more of like, if you talk to a stranger, I guess it could go well, but it could also go RE or just kind of weird, right? But I thought it was interesting. Now, this all circles back to the idea of facing criticism, right? So you need to be able to face both good and bad things. And this is kind of like a lesson for me right now, because I've always thought that, excuse me, that criticizing people, whether good or bad, is bad, right? So if you tell someone like, oh, you did a fine job, you did an excellent job, or you did a poor job, you did a very bad job, is the same thing. So I was always like, you know what? If you're gonna say something nice or if you're gonna say something bad, just don't say it, right? Like, I don't want to hear it. But then I'm missing out on validation, right? I'm missing out on changing. I'm missing out on feedback. And more importantly, I'm missing out on communication and that feedback loop that goes back and forth between people, right? Like, I noticed this, I noticed that, you're doing this good, you can improve on this, right? You can do this better, etc. So I think it's very interesting also to ask for the good and bad things that you're doing, right? From other people, so you can improve receiving feedback. I heard this a while back. I don't remember where I read it or where I saw it, but it's basically the idea of like going up to the people you're close to and asking them, hey, what can I improve on? Hey, what am I doing good? Right? And then just hearing them out, like taking in that feedback, right? Clarifying, I guess, is important. Also asking questions to know, like as a teacher, if I'm like, hey guys, what can I improve on? And they're like, oh, you can be more dynamic, like clarify that. Like, what do you mean dynamic? Like specifically, like what type of things, not like challenging, but like actually looking to clarify, right? Like kind of like being curious. And again, in experimental terms, I think all of this could lead to a good place, right? And especially because you're getting that validation, which I think is the interesting thing. Now, I've been watching some videos and a lot of people talk about how external validation is like bad, seeking external validation is toxic, blah blah blah. And I'm like, yeah, it is to a certain extent, but it's also necessary, it's needed. We live in a society, right? So we need that validation from other people. But like a very practical way to get it is asking for it, like explicitly asking people for validation, right? Like, hey, what am I doing good, right? At the end of the week, right? What am I doing good? What am I doing bad? What can I improve on this week? What did I do that was good? What could I keep doing? What am I doing bad? What could I improve on? Right? Like, that's, I think, the real way of seeking external validation, especially for people that maybe want to get famous or things like that, right? Kind of like me. You seek that validation from the people around you, right? And you get it both in good and bad terms, right? And you take that in, and it, again, like I said, it feeds the feedback loop, and then you're able to communicate more effectively with people. Now, that's in terms of external validation. Now, internal validation, I think, is important, but I hated how people always talk about it like this vague concept, right? Like, you need to get validation from yourself. You need intrinsic validation, like the attention, the validation, the respect. You are going to give it to yourself, not from anybody else, right? And that all sounds very poetic and beautiful, but what the hell does it mean, right? I don't know what that means. So I was thinking about it, and I came to the conclusion that it might mean on practical terms, it might mean that you need to do things for yourself, right? So I'll give you an example. Like, if I'm making music and I say, okay, I'm gonna make this music to get 100 views and to get more fans and to get a lot of likes and blah blah blah, that's seeking external validation, which may or may not happen, which may or may not be important. But what is important is that you set goals for yourself, right? Now, how can you set goals for yourself on practical terms? You can say, for example, I'm gonna make a song where in the instrumentals there, I want a piano and a trumpet, right? I want to make a song with a piano and a trumpet in it, right? Or I want to make a song where I rap really fast, right? For me, like, that's my goal. That's not for people, right? That's not external, that's for me. Or I want to make an album where I have 17 songs, right? For me, like that. See, and that's how you seek intrinsic validation, right? On practical terms, not just this beautiful, vague, abstract idea of, oh yeah, validation comes from within or from the inside or from you. Yeah, but what does that mean? I think it means setting goals that are for yourself, right? I make these videos for me in the future so I can come back and see what I was thinking about, what my mind state was at during these times, right? Not for you, not for people, because like nobody even watches these videos. So yeah, more on, that's kind of what I'm getting to right here with this idea. Now, that was the first topic I wanted to discuss. The second topic is the practical implications of a class. Now, I was just thinking about how I'm kind of wrong here, because when you're in college, you are taught to do a lesson plan, right? As a teacher. Like, for instance, I studied English teaching. So they teach you the format, they give you a format. Well, in some cases, I took this certification course and they gave me a format, and you follow that format. And no, in college too, they give you a format and they tell you, okay, you need timetable fit, you need to know the students levels, you need to know student level ages, resources, material, what are you going to do, the objectives, the sub objectives, the possible problems, possible solutions, blah blah blah. Like all these things, you need to plan them out, right, for a class. And there's like a big lesson plan you need to do at the beginning of every course that you need to turn into the school, right? Like, this is my plan for the semester, for the partial, for the quarter, like whatever, for the year, right? But they don't teach you when to plan, right? The idea here is that you should be responsible and you should plan your classes ahead of time, which, like, the typical case is like during summer vacation or during winter vacation, right? You're supposed to sit down, you have your 2 weeks off, your month off as a teacher, and you plan all of your classes, right? That's the idea, and that's what I would do. Now, this doesn't work, because what you need to do is actually you need to have an idea, like a vague idea, a general idea of what you need to do throughout the course. But then if we're talking about every single week, like every specific class or every specific week or month, you need to know what you're going to do. And if you plan ahead of time, like let's say you plan in June or July, you're not going to remember in October what you were planning in June or July, right? So that's kind of the problem there. So I feel like they don't teach you this, and this is something that I've kind of learned. In the beginning, when you first start being a teacher, you always plan classes, right? But eventually you get kind of lazy, or you get familiar with the system, or I don't really know what happens. You get comfortable, and then you just think that you don't have to plan, right? Like every week. So then you get into this lazy mode where you're just kind of like, I already know what I'm gonna do the whole course. I'll just, wing it, right? Like walk into class, not unannounced, but like really with no idea what we're gonna do. And then I just like, oh, here's the material that I planned a couple months ago, or at the beginning of before the course started. And that's not fruitful. That's not enriching for you or for students or for anybody, right? So the when you need to plan is actually a combination of in the beginning, but also as you move along, you need to tweak, you need to adjust the activities, the lesson plan. What I've been doing actually has been, in a way, kind of what I would do in the beginning, which was every week, like sit down, and plan what I was gonna do the next week, right? And I feel like it's kind of like growing, it's maturing, it's like the spiral, it's developing, because this is the first time I give this subject or this course. It's called theories of development and learning, I think, or yeah, something like that, learning, yeah. And what I've been doing there is I've actually been sitting down every week and planning like specifically the activities in the class for the following week. But if I am to do this, or if I am to give this subject again, like next year, I won't need to do that, because I already have the material, right? I'll just have to like review it, check it, right? Maybe watch a couple videos or research the topics a little bit to have an example is very important to when you search, when you prepare a class, you need to prepare examples, right? So it's very important to do that too. um, yeah, but basically the idea here is to abstain or to not do all of this like all at once in the beginning, right? Like, and it is kind of lazy, even though it's counterintuitive. Like, how is that being lazy if you're working super hard at the beginning of the semester? Well, that's so I don't have to do any more work during the course, right? Like, I do it all in the beginning and that's it. I can forget about it, but you really can't, because you're not going to remember. You're not going to have examples, right? The class isn't going to be enriching. So I've really been like focusing on that, and not just how to plan, but when to plan and how often to adjust it, right? So I feel like that's also important. Okay, now the third topic I wanted to discuss is something called Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, or CCRU. I was watching this iceberg video because I like to watch iceberg videos. I have one on, I've watched one on psychology, psychological experiments. I have one on sociology that I need to watch. And I just recently watched one on philosophy. Iceberg, the theory, the iceberg theories of, of philosophy. It goes from like the most common ones to like ones that nobody knows about. Again, the weird, the rare, the often controversial, unorthodox ideas. And I learned about this guy called Nick Land, I think his name was. Yeah. And Nick Land, along with other people during that time, had a lot of weird ideas that kind of combine philosophy and technology, right? And they developed this website called the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, where they basically spoke on their ideas, which are fascinating. A lot of them are really fascinating. But I wanted to talk specifically about this idea called hyperstition. Now, hyperstition, I think, it mixes, I think, some ideas from like Carl Jung, the collective unconscious, but also this like the belief and the secret, the if you think it, it will become a manifestation in real life, right? Like think, believe, and create and live it, right? Because basically what it says, the hyperstition theory or philosophical idea says that like that which is created or developed, right, in the imagination, like for example in movies, in books, in series, in pop culture, in music, right, like in the entertainment realm, that those ideas eventually become reality, right? Now there are a couple of examples for this, like the idea of virtual reality. I guess they say virtual reality was developed in like movies from the 70s or 80s or something like that, when it wasn't a real thing, and then eventually it becomes a real thing, right? So it's a play on the words superstition and hyper, which is something that is augmented, which their philosophy was acceleration, ACC, which is again the idea of combining philosophy and technology, where like the objective was basically to accelerate everything as fast as we could, right? Grow as fast as we could, which is the moment we're in history right now, where like everything's moving fast and technology and so many advances and blah 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 and progress, right? So it's a play on that hyper and then stition, right? Another concrete example which I came up with was The Simpsons, right? The Simpsons is known to predict the future, kind of like it did with Donald Trump, right? Where it didn't predict, but there's an episode, right, where Donald Trump becomes president or is running for president way before 2016, way before Donald Trump was actually president, and then it became a reality, right? Now we can say, is it really that these ideas feed reality, or is it that people are intuitive and just kind of tap into reality and kind of see where things are headed, right? Because Donald Trump was kind of always wanting to be president, even since like the early 80s 90s, right? Like he had that idea. And I've seen The Simpsons talk about how The Simpsons is a show that's like a lot of times uh, developed by like scientists, right? So people like smart people that know what's happening, and they may see patterns. So maybe that's, and it's also one of the longest running shows on television. So it's like out of all the things they do, like a lot of them, just by statistics or statistically speaking, they have to come, they have to become true, or they have to turn into reality. But yeah, this is a very interesting idea, because it talks about how you can think of something not just as an individual, like I want to have a good job, and then you just have a good job, but as a society, right? How as a society we can think of these things, right? In pop culture and movies, like, oh yeah, like right now, in Mexico, there's this the Tesla robot memes, which are hilarious. They're funny. But it's like, what would happen if Tesla robots came to Mexico? And then it's like, in Mexico, we would just put them to work, right? And all these like funny situations. Um, and right now, it's an idea, it's in the collective imagination, right? But then what if, like, in 20, 30 years, that's actually happening? And again, it's like tapping into using your intuition and kind of seeing where things are headed. I mean, Tesla's around, they're developing robots, technology, they're experimenting. So it's like, that's probably where things are going, right? So it's like, which one's first, the chicken or the egg, right? Type of scenario. Um, okay, anyway, I feel like there's a lot to unpack there with the CCRU, but I haven't really digged deeper into it. I would like to dig deeper into it. Okay, and the fourth topic I was going to discuss is the difference between intelligence and wisdom. Now, I don't know if I've spoken on this topic before. I think I've touched the topics in my videos on intelligence and wisdom. But here I'm going to be talking specifically about how I think you can't be both. Excuse me. Mm, that is, you can't be both intelligent and wise. Because the person that's intelligent is rational, is logical, and it's always going to be thinking about like the practical way of solving problems, right? The practical solution, the practical way out, right? Regardless of people's emotions, regardless of future consequences, like what is cold, logically, oriented. And the wise person, like, and I've spoken on this, I think, before, that they say, the intelligent person wins the fight, the wise person avoids it, right? So wisdom has to do more with like morality, right? It's kind of an abstract, vague concept as well, but it has to do with like making the right choice, right? Not in terms of logic, not the right choice of as in this is the correct logical choice, but like the humane choice, right? The most beneficial long term, right? As in like saving lives and stopping world hunger and world suffering and human suffering and all these type of things, right? um, so they, like finding a person that's both intelligent and wise. If you know someone like that, like a celebrity or a historical figure, let me know in the comments. We could think about the greats, maybe like Gandhi, how he was both intelligent, like a lawyer, and he was also wise, right? And what he did, the way he would dress, the way he would like influence and persuade people to join the cause and things like that. So I guess, but being both, I think is hard. You're either, as an average person, you're either intelligent or you're wise, right? But you can't be both. Now, the characteristic, I think, of a wise person, and this is funny because you watch a movie. Like this weekend I was watching The Wedding Planner, and if you guys watched it, it's with J-Lo and Matthew McConaughey. And there's this scene where there's this other guy, not Matthew McConaughey, but another guy. His name is Massimo, and Massimo is in love with J-Lo, but J-Lo doesn't love him, right? So Massimo is speaking like from the heart to J-Lo. And Massimo's kind of like this comic relief character. He's kind of funny, kind of stupid, right? Kind of dumb. You wouldn't really say he's intelligent, right? Because comic relief characters are typically not intelligent, right? They're kind of stupid, and that's what makes them funny, right? So in this case, Massimo is listening to J-Lo's problem. They're eating at the table, And Massimo says something wise, right? He says, you need to learn patience. You need to learn that love is not perfect and that love is just love, right? And J-Lo's like, that's so wise. Like, I think she says my mom said that, or my mom would say that, and that's wise. And that moment was like a light bulb moment for me where I was like, yeah, you see, like he's wise, but he's not intelligent, right? He can't be. And then an intelligent person is not going to be wise because they're always thinking about the logical solution, the practical solution, right? So I felt like intelligence and wisdom are at each other's throats, right? Like they're at odds basically. And any now I'm thinking like any moral, ethical, philosophical dilemma typically I think involves making the intelligent decision or making the wise decision, right? Do you save one person or five people on the train tracks, right? And you're like, well, obviously one person because quantitatively, objectively, logically, it's four fewer deaths, sorry, right? But the wise decision would be for none of them to die. So how do you achieve that? Right? And I think in the example of the trolley problem in philosophy, I think the trolley is headed for the five people, right? So if you don't, so let's say you'd say I wouldn't do anything, then five people die, right? Instead of one, by you switching the trolley, right? Which is interesting because if it were one person that would die, right? If the trolley was headed only towards one person and you do nothing, you kind of feel better because you're like, okay, only at least, it wasn't five people, it was only one person. But if it's headed towards five people, you have to change it because that's the logical, intelligent solution. But the wise decision would be for none of them to die, right? So it's challenging, right? Like I was watching Olympus Has Fallen, and where like North Korea takes over the White House. It's a very, I recommend that movie if you're really into action. It's bloody, aggressive, violent, action packed. It's a good movie. Olympus Has Fallen. And in it, the president of the United States gets kidnapped. I think it's Gerard Butler or something like. No, it's the Harvey Dent character from The Dark Knight, right? I forgot his name, but anyway, he gets kidnapped, and the Koreans are demanding that the United States retreats like a navy float from Japan or something like that, and that they exit the demilitarized zone in Korea, right? And then they're like, if you don't do that, we're gonna kill the president and the hostages and everything, right? So they're at this dilemma where they're like, we're gonna lose Korea, but then we're gonna lose, like you would say, the intelligent, practical, logical solution is, to just let them kill the hostages and the president or whatever, right? Because you're not gonna back out of Korea, right? But that's not the wise decision. That's not the humane decision, because how are you going to allow the president to get shot or the hostages, right? So it's like those conundrums, those dilemmas ultimately are between morality, between wisdom and intelligence, right? So here it says how you can't be both. If you are wise, you are typically calm and not seen as intelligent or quick by others. Also because the characteristics of intelligence have to do with potential, quickness, agility, flexibility, right? Demonstrating to others that you're fast. And wisdom has to do with more of a calm demeanor, laid back, like the old wise sage that's kind of sitting up in the mountains, not really doing anything, walking slowly, like checking out nature. And it's kind of like, that person's not intelligent, right? They're probably just wise, but they can be, I don't know. But yeah, if you know of any wise, intelligent people, let me know in the comments. Okay, so if you're intelligent, on the other hand, you tend not to be wise since you don't know when or how to apply things such as with planning, right? So what does this mean? I asked ChatGPT like what the difference was, and it basically told me like if you're intelligent, you know what, right? Like conceptual knowledge, like what to do and all these things, but you don't know when to do them or how to apply things, right? I don't know what I meant by such as with planning. I guess well, if a person is planning, oh yeah, like planning to do things, right? Like if you say, okay, the right thing to do is to tell the person the truth, right? But if the person is just getting out from work, and you're like, hey, I need to tell you the truth, right? Like that's the smart thing to do. It's not the wise thing to do because they're not in a clear state of mind, right? In a clear headed state of mind, right? They're gonna be stressed out. They're tired. They're hungry. They just want to relax. Like, you need to look for the time when to do it, right? Which is this is and how to apply. Uh, in this case, like what you do know, right? Your intelligence. So it's like I guess intelligence is first, and then wisdom, right? Like you're smart, you know what to do, but now you need to figure out when to do it and how to do it, right? Which is the application part, which is actually like the more practical part, right? If you really think about it, like intelligence is kind of like the theory, and then the application of the theory, the practice is the wisdom, right? Which makes sense because wisdom, they say, is achieved through experience, right? You get wise through experience. So you can have a high school graduate or a university college graduate who's really intelligent, right? Who got all straight A's, graduated cum laude from his university or whatever with honors, but they're not wise because they don't have experience, right? Because they don't know how to apply, when to apply certain things, right? So it's like they face the real world, and the real world needs you to be wise, not intelligent, right? So I guess like this idea of like connections, right? I think back to like my high school years or even my middle school or elementary years, and I was like, man, if I could go back, like people say that, right? If you could go back and talk to the 9-year-old you, the 10-year-old you, what would you say? I think I would say hold on to the people you meet, right? Like there's going to be this thing called MySpace and then later on Facebook, and just make one, what's it called? One like page, right? One profile page or whatever, and just have everybody on there, right? Because, I complain a lot about not having connections, but it's my own fault because I've kind of cut people off from my life. So it's like the way in which you get connections is by keeping people in your life, right? So you meet people, you keep them there, you keep everybody, and then you just keep piling up people and people. And then, it's like a pragmatic, utilitarian approach. I don't know if there's an emotional aspect to it, but it's like you keep people around because you may need them in the future. But I guess it's just like instinct, it's basic survival, right? You're not alone. You're not going to survive in the wilderness alone, right? You're not going to survive in this life alone. So then when you see people that you may need in the future, or even if you can't see the potential in it right now, which is also a connection of intelligence, right? How everybody has that potential. Because again, it's theory, it's the potential, intelligence, and then wisdom is the application of that potential, of that theory, of that intelligence, I guess. Yeah, you may need these people in the future. So, I think that was unwise of me to do, of like cutting people off. But yeah, I think that's important to do. So if you're intelligent, you tend not to be wise since you don't know when or how to apply things. Yes, examples. Just to kind of finish this video off, I love to give some concrete examples to kind of land like the theory, application. Cutting costs. So let's say that you're a CEO at a company and you're like, I have a problem. I'm spending too much money, or I'm not earning enough money, or whatever the problem is with money. I need to cut costs. And how do I cut costs? Well, the intelligent thing to do would be to fire employees, right? You fire the employees and you cut costs, right? You don't need that many workers anyway, right? Let's say. But the wise thing to do, I guess, in this case would be to consider your employees, right? Like you may need them later on down the road. They're going to suffer. They're going to be resentful, like that's just not the humane, right thing to do, right? It is the correct thing to do logically, but it's not the right thing to do morally, right? It's not wise. It's unwise, right? Because you're going to affect workers, right? Or another one is like having a good paying job. So you're like, this is really smart because I'm making a lot of money. I can finally afford my house, my car, whatever. I have everything I want, but I'm getting overworked, right? I'm being exploited. I'm stressed out. I'm having health problems. So it's unwise. It's smart, but it's unwise. See? And this is where like you need to kind of integrate that wisdom, I guess, that experience, that how to, that when application part. And in this case, I also think about Forrest Gump, right? How Forrest Gump is kind of like a dumb character. He's stupid, but I guess he's really wise, especially because at the end of the movie, he says that thing about love, right? I don't remember it right now, but if you do, please leave it in the comments. I think he says something about how I think he tells Jenny like, I know I may not be smart, but I do know how to love, or I do know what love is, or something like that, right? It's like, whoa, like that's wise, right? That's, yeah. Okay, so that's all I got for this video. So I spoke on these 4 different ideas. Basically, failure therapy, teaching, the CCRU, which I think is a whole another world there to explore. Very 90s, very Matrix, that Matrix vibe. And intelligence versus wisdom. Hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one, okay? Peace.